Section 34 of Within a Budding Grove by Marcel Proust. Translated by C.K. Scott Moncrief. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kristen Hand. Seascape with Frieze of Girls, Part 1. That day, as for some days past, Saint-Loup had been obliged to go to Doncières, where, until his leave finally expired, he would be on duty now until late every afternoon. I was sorry that he was not at Balbec. I had seen alight from carriages and pass, some into the ballroom of the casino, others into the ice cream shop, young women who at a distance had seemed to me lovely. I was passing through one of those periods of our youth, unprovided with any one definite love, vacant, in which at all times and in all places, as a lover the woman by whose charms he is smitten, we desire, we seek, we see beauty. Let but a single real feature, the little that one distinguishes of a woman seen from afar or from behind, enable us to project the form of beauty before our eyes. We imagine that we have seen her before. Our heart beats, we hasten in pursuit, and will always remain half persuaded that it was she, provided that the woman has vanished. It is only if we manage to overtake her that we realize our mistake. Besides, as I grew more and more delicate, I was inclined to overrate the simplest pleasures because of the difficulties that sprang up in the way of my attaining them. Charming women I seemed to see all round me, because I was too tired, if it was on the beach, too shy if it was in the casino or at a pastry cook's, to go anywhere near them. And yet if I was soon to die, I should have liked first to know the appearance at close quarters, in reality, of the prettiest girls that life had to offer, even though it should be another than myself, or no one at all who was to take advantage of the offer. I did not, in fact, appreciate the desire for possession that underlay my curiosity. I should have had the courage to enter the ballroom if Saint-Loup had been with me. Left by myself, I was simply hanging about in front of the Grand Hotel until it was time for me to join my grandmother, when, still almost at the far end of the paved front along which they projected in a discordant spot of color, I saw coming towards me 5 or 6 young girls, as different in appearance and manner from all the people whom one was accustomed to see at Balbec as could have been. Landed there, none knew whence, a flight of gulls which performed with measured steps upon the sands, the dawdlers using their wings to overtake the rest, a movement the purpose of which seems as obscure to the human bathers whom they do not appear to see, as it is clearly determined in their own birdish minds. One of these strangers was pushing as she came, with one hand, her bicycle. 2 others carried golf clubs, and their attire was generally in contrast to that of the other girls at Balbec, some of whom it was true went in for games, but without adopting any special outfit. It was the hour at which ladies and gentlemen came out every day for a turn on the front, exposed to the merciless fire of the long glasses fastened upon them, as if they had each borne some disfigurement which she felt it her duty to inspect in its minutest details, by the chief magistrate's wife, proudly seated there with her back to the bandstand, in the middle of that dread line of chairs on which presently they too, actors turned critics, would come and establish themselves, to scrutinize in their turn those others who would then be filing past them. All these people who paced up and down the front, tacking as violently as if it had been the deck of a ship, for they could not lift a leg without at the same time waving their arms, turning their heads and eyes, settling their shoulders, compensating by a balancing movement on one side for the movement they had just made on the other, and puffing out their faces. And who, pretending not to see so as to let it be thought that they were not interested, but covertly watching, for fear of running against the people who were walking beside or coming towards them, did in fact butt into them, became entangled with them, because each was mutually the object of the same secret attention veiled beneath the same apparent disdain, their love, and consequently their fear, of the crowd being one of the most powerful motives in all men, whether they seek to please other people or to astonish them, or to show them that they despise them. In the case of the solitary, his seclusion, even when it is absolute and ends only with life itself, has often as its primary cause a disordered love of the crowd, which so far overrules every other feeling, that not being able to win, when he goes out, the admiration of his hall porter, of the passers-by, of the cabman whom he hails, he prefers not to be seen by them at all, and with that object abandons every activity that would oblige him to go out of doors. Amongst all these people, some of whom were pursuing a train of thought, but if so betrayed its instability by spasmodic gestures, a roving gaze as little in keeping as the circumspect tributation of their neighbors, the girls whom I had noticed, with that mastery over their limbs which comes from perfect bodily condition and a sincere contempt for the rest of humanity, were advancing straight ahead, without hesitation or stiffness, performing exactly the movements that they wished to perform, each of their members in full independence of all the rest, the greater part of their bodies preserving that immobility which is so noticeable in a good waltzer. They were now quite near me. Although each was a type absolutely different from the others, they all had beauty. But to tell the truth, I had seen them for so short a time, and without venturing to look them straight in the face, that I had not yet individualized any of them, save one, whom her straight nose, her dark complexion pointed in contrast among the rest, like, in a Renaissance picture of the Epiphany, a king of Arab caste. They were known to me only, one by a pair of eyes, hard, set, and mocking, another by cheeks in which the pink had that coppery tint which makes one think of geraniums. And even of these points I had not yet indissolubly attached any one to one of these girls, rather than to another. And when, according to the order in which their series met the eye, marvelous because the most different aspects came next one another, because all scales of colours were combined into it, but confused as a piece of music in which I should not have been able to isolate and identify at the moment of their passage the successive phrases, no sooner distinguished than forgotten, I saw emerge a pallid oval, black eyes, green eyes. I knew not if these were the same that had already charmed me a moment ago. I could not bring them home to any one girl whom I might thereby have set apart from the rest and so identified. And this want, in my vision, of the demarcations which I should presently establish between them, sent flooding over the group a wave of harmony, the continuous transfusion of a beauty fluid, collective, and mobile. It was not, perhaps, in this life of ours, mere chance that had, in forming this group of friends, chosen them all of such beauty. Perhaps these girls, whose attitude was enough to reveal their nature, bold, frivolous, and hard, extremely sensitive to everything that was ludicrous or ugly, incapable of yielding to an intellectual or moral attraction, had naturally felt themselves, among companions of their own age, repelled by all those in whom a pensive or sensitive disposition was betrayed, by shyness, awkwardness, constraint, by what they would say didn't appeal to them, and from such had held aloof, while they attached themselves, on the other hand, to others to whom they were drawn by a certain blend of grace, suppleness, and physical neatness, the only form in which they were able to picture the frankness of a seductive character and the promise of pleasant hours in one another's company. Perhaps, too, the class to which they belonged, a class which I should not have found it easy to define, was at that point in its evolution at which, whether thanks to its growing wealth and leisure, or thanks to new athletic habits, extended now even to certain plebeian elements, and a habit of physical culture to which had not yet been added the culture of the mind, a social atmosphere, comparable to that of smooth and prolific schools of sculpture, which have not yet gone in for tortured expressions, produces naturally and in abundance fine bodies with fine legs, fine hips, wholesome and reposeful faces, with an air of agility and guile. And were they not noble and calm models of human beauty that I beheld there, outlined against the sea, like statues exposed to the sunlight upon a Grecian shore? Just as if, in the heart of their band, which progressed along the front like a luminous comet, they had decided that the surrounding crowd was composed of creatures of another race, whose sufferings could not awaken in them any sense of fellowship. They appeared not to see them, forced those who had stopped to talk to step aside, as though from the path of a machine that had been set going by itself, so that it was no good waiting for it to get out of their way, their utmost sign of consciousness being when, if some old gentleman of whom they did not admit the existence and thrust from them the contact, had fled with a frightened or furious, but a headlong or ludicrous motion. They looked at one another and smiled. They had, for whatever did not form part of their group, no affectation of contempt. Their genuine contempt was sufficient. But they could not set eyes on an obstacle without amusing themselves by crossing it, either in a running jump or with both feet together, because they were all filled to the brim, exuberant with that youth which we need so urgently to spend that even when we are unhappy or unwell, obedient rather to the necessities of our age than to the mood of the day, we can never pass anything that can be jumped over or slid down without indulging ourselves conscientiously, interrupting, interspersing our slow progress, as Chopin his most melancholy phrase, with graceful deviations in which caprice is blended with virtuosity. The wife of an elderly banker, after hesitating between various possible exposures for her husband, had settled him on a folding chair, facing the front, sheltered from the wind and the sun by the bandstand. Having seen him comfortably installed there, she had gone to buy a newspaper which she would read aloud to him, to distract him, one of her little absences which she never prolonged for more than 5 minutes, which seemed long enough to him, but which she repeated at frequent intervals, so that this old husband, on whom she lavished an attention that she took care to conceal, should have the impression that he was still quite alive and like other people, and was in no need of protection. The platform of the bandstand provided, above his head, a natural and tempting springboard, across which, without a moment's hesitation, the eldest of the little band began to run. She jumped over the terrified old man, whose yachting cap was brushed by the nimble feet, to the great delight of the other girls, especially of a pair of green eyes and a dashing face, which expressed, for that bold act, an admiration and a merriment in which I seemed to discern a trace of timidity, a shamefaced and blustering timidity which did not exist in the others. "Oh, the poor old man! He makes me sick. He looks half dead," said a girl with a croaking voice, but with more sarcasm than sympathy. They walked on a little way, then stopped for a moment in the middle of the road, with no thought whether they were impeding the passage of other people, and held a council, a solid body of irregular shape, compact, unusual, and shrill, like birds that gather on the ground at the moment of flight. Then they resumed their leisurely stroll along the front, against a background of sea. By this time their charming features had ceased to be indistinct and impersonal. I had dealt them like cards into so many heaps to compose, failing their names, of which I was still ignorant, the big one who had jumped over the old banker, the little one who stood out against the horizon of sea with her plump and rosy cheeks, her green eyes, the one with the straight nose and dark complexion, in such contrast to all the rest, another with a white face like an egg on which a tiny nose described an arc of a circle like a chicken's beak, yet another wearing a hooded cape, which gave her so poverty-stricken an appearance, and so contradicted the smartness of the figure beneath, that the explanation which suggested itself was that this girl must have parents of high position, who valued their self-esteem so far above the visitors to Baalbec, and the sartorial elegance of their own children, that it was a matter of utmost indifference to them that their daughter should stroll on the front, dressed in a way which humbler people would have considered too modest. A girl with brilliant, laughing eyes and plump, colorless cheeks, a black polo cap pulled down over her face, who was pushing a bicycle with so exaggerated a movement of her hips, with an air borne out by her language which was so typically of the gutter and was being shouted so loud, when I passed her, although among her expressions I caught that irritating "live my own life," that, abandoning the hypothesis which her friend's hooded cape made me construct, I concluded instead that all these girls belonged to the population which frequents the racing tracks, and must be the very juvenile mistresses of professional bicyclists. In any event, in none of my suppositions was there any possibility of their being virtuous. At first sight, in the way in which they looked at one another and smiled, in the insistent stare of the one with the dull cheeks, I had grasped that they were not. Besides, my grandmother had always watched over me with a delicacy too timorous for me not to believe that the sum total of the things one ought not to do was indivisible, or that girls who were lacking in respect for their elders would suddenly be stopped short by scruples when there were pleasures at stake more tempting than that of jumping over an octogenarian. Though they were now separately identifiable, still the mutual response which they gave one another with eyes animated my self-sufficiency and the spirit of comradeship, in which were kindled at every moment now the interest, Now the insolent indifference with which each of them sparkled according as her glance fell on one of her friends or on passing strangers. That consciousness, moreover, of knowing one another intimately enough always to go about together, by making them a band apart, established between their independent and separate bodies, as slowly as they advanced, a bond invisible but harmonious, like a single warm shadow, a single atmosphere making them a whole, as homogeneous in its parts as it was different from the crowd through which the procession gradually wound. For an instant, as I passed the dark one with the fat cheeks who was wheeling a bicycle, I caught her smiling, sidelong glance, aimed from the center of that inhuman world which enclosed the life of this little tribe, an inaccessible, unknown world, to which the idea of what I was could certainly never attain nor find a place in it. Wholly occupied with what her companions were saying, this young girl in her polo cap, pulled down very low over her brow, had she seen me at the moment in which the dark ray emanating from her eyes had fallen on me? In the heart of what universe did she distinguish me? It would have been as hard for me to say, as when certain peculiarities are made visible, thanks to the telescope, in a neighboring plant, it is difficult to arrive at the conclusion that human beings inhabit it, that they can see us, or to say what ideas the sight of us can have aroused in their minds. If we thought that the eyes of a girl like that were merely two glittering sequins of mica, we should not be athirst to know her and to unite her life to ours. But we feel that what shines in those reflecting discs is not due solely to their material composition. That is, unknown to us, the dark shadows of the ideas that the creature is conceiving, relative to the people and places that she knows. The turf of racecourses, the sand of cycling tracks, over which, pedaling on past fields and woods, she would have drawn me after her, that little Peri, more seductive to me than she of the Persian paradise. The shadows, too, of the home to which she will presently return, of the plans that she is forming or that others have formed for her, and above all that it is she, with her desires, her sympathies, her revulsions, her obscure and incessant will. I knew that I should never possess this young cyclist if I did not possess also what there was in her eyes, and it was consequently her whole life that filled me with desire. A sorrowful desire because I felt that it was not to be realized, but exhilarating because what had hitherto been my life, having ceased of a sudden to be my whole life, being no more now than a little part of the space stretching out before me, which I was burning to cover and which was composed of the lives of these girls, offered me that prolongation, that possible multiplication of oneself which is happiness. And no doubt the fact that we had, these girls and I, not one habit, as we had not one idea in common, was to make it more difficult for me to make friends with them and to please them. But perhaps also it was thanks to those differences, to my consciousness, that there did not enter into the composition of the nature and actions of these girls a single element that I knew or possessed, that there came in place of my satiety a thirst, like that with which a dry land burns, for a life which my soul, because it had never until now received one drop of it, would absorb all the more greedily in long draughts, with a more perfect imbibation. I had looked so closely at the dark cyclist with the bright eyes that she seemed to notice my attention, and said to the biggest of the girls something I could not hear. To be honest, this dark one was not the one that pleased me most, simply because she was dark, and because, since the day on which, from the little path by Tansonville, I had seen Gilbert, a girl with reddish hair and a golden skin had remained for me the inaccessible ideal. But Gilbert herself, had I not loved her principally because she had appeared to me haloed with that aureole of being the friend of Bergot, of going with him to look at old cathedrals? And in the same way could I not rejoice at having seen this dark girl look at me, which made me hope that it would be easier for me to get to know her first, for she would introduce me to the others, to the pitiless one who had jumped over the old man's head, to the cruel one who had said, "He makes me sick, poor old man," to all of them in turn, among whom, moreover, she had the distinction of being their inseparable companion. And yet the supposition that I might some day be the friend of one or other of these girls, that their eyes, whose incomprehensible gaze struck me now and again, playing upon me unawares, like the play of sunlight upon a wall, might ever, by a miraculous alchemy, allow to interpenetrate among their ineffable particles the idea of my existence, some affection for my person, that I might some day take my place among them in the evolution of their course by the sea's edge, that supposition appeared to me to contain within it a contradiction as insoluble as if, standing before some classical frieze or a fresco representing a procession, I had believed it possible for me, the spectator, to take my place, beloved of them, among the godlike hierophants. The happiness of knowing these girls was then not to be realized. Certainly it would not have been the first of its kind that I had renounced. I had only to recall the numberless strangers whom, even at Baalbec, the carriage bowling away from them at full speed had forced me forever to abandon. And indeed, the pleasure that was given me by the little band, as noble as if it had been composed of Hellenic virgins, came from some suggestion that there was in it of the flight of passing figures along a road. This fleetingness of persons who are not known to us, who force us to put out from the harbor of life, in which the women whose societies we frequent have all, in course of time, laid bare their blemishes, urges us into that state of pursuit in which there is no longer anything to arrest the imagination. But to strip our pleasures of imagination is to reduce them to their own dimensions, that is to say, to nothing. Offered me by one of those procuresses, whose good offices, all the same, the reader has seen that I by no means scorned. Withdrawn from the element which gave them so many fine shades and such vagueness, these girls would have enchanted me less. We must have imagination, awakened by the uncertainty of being able to attain our object, to create a goal which hides our other goal from us, and by substituting for sensual pleasures the idea of penetrating into a life prevents us from recognizing that pleasure, from tasting its true savor, from restricting it to its own rage. There must be between us and the fish, which if we saw it for the first time cooked and served on a table, would not appear worth the endless trouble, craft, and stratagem that are necessary if we are to catch it, interposed during our afternoons with the rod, the ripple to whose surface come wavering, without our quite knowing what we intend to do with them, the burnished gleam of flesh, the indefiniteness of a form, in the fluidity of a transparent and flowing azure. These girls benefited also by that alteration of social values characteristic of seaside life. All the advantages which, in our ordinary environment, extend and magnify our importance, we there find to have become invisible, in fact, to be eliminated. While on the other hand, the people whom we suppose, without reason, to enjoy similar advantages, appear to us amplified to artificial dimensions. This made it easy for strange women generally, and today for these girls in particular, to acquire an enormous importance in my eyes, and impossible to make them aware of such importance as I might myself possess. But if there was this to be said for the excursion of the little band, that it was but an excerpt from the innumerable flight of passing women, which had always disturbed me, their flight was here reduced to a movement so slow as to approach immobility. Now precisely because, in a phase so far from rapid, faces no longer swept past me in a whirlwind, but calm and distinct, still appeared beautiful, I was prevented from thinking as I had so often thought when Madame de Villeparis's carriage bore me away, that at closer quarters, if I had stopped for a moment, certain details, a pitted skin, drooping nostrils, a silly gape, a grimace of a smile, an ugly figure might have been substituted, in the face and body of the women, for those that I had doubtless imagined, for there had sufficed a pretty outline, a glimpse of a fresh complexion, for me to add, in entire good faith, a fascinating shoulder, a delicious glance of which I carried in my mind forever a memory or preconceived idea. These rapid decipherings of a person whom we see in motion exposing us thus to the same errors as those too rapid readings, in which, on a single syllable and without waiting to identify the rest, we base, instead of the word that is in the text, a wholly different word with which our memory supplies us. It could not be so with me now. I had looked well at them all. Each of them I had seen, not from every angle and rarely in full face, but all the same in 2 or 3 aspects different enough to enable me to make either the correction or the verification, to take a proof of the different possibilities of line and color that are hazarded at first sight, and to see persist in them through a series of expressions something unalterably material. I could say to myself with conviction that neither in Paris nor at Baalbec, in the most favorable hypotheses of what might have happened, even if I had been able to stop and talk to them, the passing women who had caught my eye, had there ever been one whose appearance, followed by her disappearance without my having managed to know her, had left me with more regret than would these, had given me the idea that her friendship might be a thing so intoxicating. Never, among actresses, nor among peasants, nor among girls from a convent school, had I beheld anything so beautiful, impregnated with so much that was unknown, so inestimably precious, so apparently inaccessible. They were of the unknown and potential happiness of life, an illustration so delicious and in so perfect a state, that it was almost for intellectual reasons that I was desperate with the fear that I might not be able to make, in unique conditions which left no room for any possibility of error, proper trial of what is the most mysterious thing that is offered to us by the beauty which we desire and console ourselves for never possessing, by demanding pleasure, as Swann had always refused to do before Odette's day, from women whom we have not desired, so that indeed we die without having ever known what that other pleasure was. No doubt it was possible that it was not in reality an unknown pleasure, that on a close inspection its mystery would dissipate and vanish, that it was no more than a projection, a mirage of desire. But in that case I could blame only the compulsion of a law of nature, which if it applied to these girls would apply to all, and not the imperfection of the object. For it was that which I should have chosen above all others, feeling quite certain, with a botanist's satisfaction, that it was not possible to find collected anywhere rarer specimens than these young flowers who were interrupting at this moment before my eyes the line of the sea with their slender hedge, like a bower of Pennsylvania roses adorning a garden on the brink of a cliff, between which is contained the whole tract of ocean crossed by some steamer, so slow and gliding along the blue and horizontal line that stretches from one stem to the next, that an idle butterfly, dawdling in the cup of a flower which the moving hall has long since passed, can, if it is to fly and be sure of arriving before the vessel, wait until nothing but the tiniest slice of blue still separates the questing prow from the first petal of the flower towards which it is steering. End of section 34.